Thank you, David, and thank you to WordCamp for giving me a chance to speak at this event. I'm Raymond. So today I will be talking about the WordPress optimization as for the guide for 2019. Okay, first of all, uh, we are going to cover. I'll be covering more on the WordPress speed optimization myth. Is basically something that everyone has been asking on the online forums such as Facebook or even at Facebook groups and other online forums. Basically, they are chasing the scores. They are chasing the scores constantly. They're trying to score A's for their GT matrix score or their even web page test score, but this shouldn't be your primary concern. Your primary concern should be on the user experience on your website. So after years of learning and researching, I find that there are only a few scores that matters most for a speedy website. Your first of all is you need to know your TTFB, which stands for time to first byte. Basically, it means how fast your web server responds to a user whenever your page is requested. Typically, a good benchmark for TTFB is around 200 to 300 milliseconds. And that is why, and you need to identify your target audience. Say, for example, your audience are all based in Malaysia or Singapore. It doesn't make sense for you to host your website in US or even Europe because that will cause your TTFB to be higher and your user experience will fall and your conversions will also fall. So for example, our site, AutoVecBot, is hosted at Singapore. So our TTFB is around like 230, let me check. How do I go? Oh, I cannot see. Sorry. So you can see that our first time to first byte is on the lower left is around 272 milliseconds. So generally this is pretty average. I think it's pretty decent for a website. So, and the next one that we need to consider is the first contentful pane. There is two differences. One is first pane and also one is the first contentful pane. First pane is basically, it means when it's calculated based on whenever something is rendered on your page. For example, like the background color, which doesn't make sense for the user at all. So for the first contentful pane, it means it's triggered when there is something like an image or maybe like a text or header that is available that's visible to your user and they could interact with your website. So for example, again, I use my example. The first contentful pane here, it means 1.27 seconds. Basically, in around 1.3 seconds, the user is able to have my site loaded and they are able to interact. And the other thing that is another concern is fully loaded time. Most of the time, when people see that there is a high fully loaded time, people get scared. But this is not as, for example, my fully loaded time, as you can see here, is about 14.6 seconds. 14.6 seconds, but my document complete time is around 2.645 seconds. If you see I will break this down a little bit here. Yeah, so this example is the document complete time is basically 2.663 seconds. Basically, it shows that the request ended at around this blue line, meaning all the requests is completed somewhere around over about 100 over requests. The remaining requests that I have on my site is basically loaded by external scripts like Google AdWords, Google Analytics, and all the Hotjar and all the tracking scripts which doesn't really affect the user experience. And the remaining external scripts are loaded asynchronously, so they don't really, your user can continue still use the website as normal, and the background tracking scripts will just load itself by itself. Okay, so the next, sorry about that. No problem. Okay, the second myth that everyone has is if you search for WordPress optimization tips, most of them will recommend that you cut down on the number of plugins. But this is, it is true to a certain extent, but it's not entirely true. Most of the time is suggested that is because most of the because most of the end user, they don't really understand programming and the code that is developed within the plugin. And most of the time there are other developers who just want to include as many features into their plugin, and they don't really care about the website performance. All they care is just that maybe they want to do some ad revenue from their plugin, or maybe they just want to upsell you into their paid plugin. So so you have to pick your plugins carefully. And the second reason why usually they suggest that you reduce the number of plugins because it can reduces the chances of having the plugin conflicts and also the maintenance. Like for example, previously I was using this plugin using Arrow Checkout. It's basically enables me to mimic the Shopify checkout experience. So after I activate it, everything looks good, and I didn't make further testing on it. And after 2 days, I realized that like my site, I don't get any sales, especially from credit card. So I got curious and I went to check. Actually, there is a conflict between the Braintree, my payment gateway, and also the plugin for the checkout page. So I had to contact the developer, and within hours, it was sorted out. So it's very important. This is one of the reasons why they don't recommend you using many plugins, because once you have a bug, you have normally the procedure to identify will be deactivating all the plugins and slowly activate them one by one, so that you find out which plugin is the culprit. So that is why. But if you are able to use plugins from quality developers, there is no limit on how many plugins you can use. Personally, myself, we are using about 60 plugins, 60 plugins or so. So it's quite a high number, but yeah, so far I feel the performance still okay. So the other reason is the other myth that web page test or G3 matrix will recommend you is to reduce the number of requests. But personally, I think you should reduce the number of requests that interferes with the user experience. For example, like I have 200 over requests, but only the first 100 requests is loaded in like 2.6 seconds, and the remaining are loaded at the back end asynchronously. So I don't think there is much issues with high number of requests if you know what you are doing exactly. So the next one, I will touch on the WordPress optimization fundamentals. You should imagine when you build your site out, you should imagine it as if like you need to have a strong fundamentals, just like you building a house, or maybe like a high-rise tower. If you have a strong foundation like the piling, your website will enable you to easily withstand all the maybe catastrophe like typhoon. So it applies the same for web design as well. Because if you have a strong website with a solid foundation, it will be easier for you to scale later on, and it will be easy in the long run, easier to scale, and everything is so much more easier. Because if you start with a wrong foundation, let's say you have a poor server or maybe a poorly coded team, you might have to face the trouble of migration or maybe changing the platform, and it will cause a lot of troubles down the road. So these are the few optimization fundamentals that I constantly apply. I will briefly go to update. Where's my button? Sorry. these are the few. I will touch on them over the slides. Okay. The first one is you need to have a good server and a solid server stack. I can't stress enough that most people overlook these most basic fundamentals. Your server is practically your everything. Everything starts, this is your basic, most fundamental thing that you should do right in the beginning. If let's say you are a freelancer, you can go with a shared hosting because it's still slightly cheaper in the long run. But once you have seen some growth from your site, you should move it to a proper server and a stack. Personally, I would recommend like using Linode or maybe Linode, Voucher, DigitalOcean if let's say you are comfortable with a little bit of code. And their plan starts from like $5 a month, which is pretty cheap. For shared hosting, they are typically running on cPanel, and they utilizes the LAMP stack, which is, anyone here knows LAMP stack? Yeah, so basically it's running on Apache, and it's comparing the VPS, you could use Nginx stack, which gives a far superior performance. So example, I think like HostScore I saw just now in terms of shared hosting, SiteGround gets the highest rank for shared hosting. So the other one, but for me, I'm using DIY VPS panel. We are using GridPane. There are a few options for this. You can get like, there are Easy Engine, GridPane, RunCloud. RunCloud is, I think it's a Malaysian-owned company, and also SpinUp WP. Previously, I was using Easy Engine because it's free, but after on, I migrated to GridPane because Easy Engine doesn't come with, at that time I was using the version 3, so there wasn't a control panel interface, no user interface, so it's pretty hard for me. I have to log into the server and then run everything through the command line. So after GridPane provides you with the user interface. You can enable your SSL, change your PHP, and you can enable the firewall or whatever rules that they have. Okay, so for those who are not interested in getting too technical with the servers, you can go for managed hosting. Managed hosting are relatively expensive when you start to scale. But the good thing is you don't have to know anything about the server. If you just have anything, you just go and raise a ticket, initiate a live chat. Probably they will be able to solve your issues for you in about like within 1 business days. A good one should be about 1 business day. But usually, from my experience, about within an hour. Within an hour, you should get it resolved. So a few good ones, example is like Kinstar, Pagely, and also Pantheon. They are really expensive. Not that. Yeah. Okay, the next one. Okay, remember previously I was talking about your foundation. So it applies the same for your themes and also your plugins. You need to utilize, because right now most of the themes available on the market, there are many thousands, all in Theme Forest. There's Code Canyon. You can easily find anyone with a good high sales rating. Probably it has most of the features that you want. But this is the only downside. When you have a feature-packed theme, it means that the developer try to include every single feature that their user are interested, and they try to load every single library so that in return you will experience initially the website will looks very cool, because it looks, it has everything, But after on, when you start to try to scale, then you might find that not all functions you actually utilize them. So end up this is called a bloat. So for how do you identify a clean theme or a lightly coded plugin? Normally, these kind of plugins, these kind of themes, they are very bare. They are very bare, so that you can only add the essentials that you need. Like if let's say you need a carousel JavaScript, then you just add it on later one by one. It doesn't. So it gives a very bare framework so that you can run any extra features that you want. So these are the few examples that I have listed for the bloated themes, and also an example of clean, lightweight themes. the same goes for plugins. And these are the few lightweight clean plugins. Actually, coming back to this, personally, I don't understand why people choose to use your security plugins. Because security plugins are like, like WordFence, Security, or even iTeam Security. To me, if you have started your foundation right, meaning you have choose a good server and a good server stack, and maybe a CDN like Cloudflare, basically you should be able to deter most of the attacks without having to burden your WordPress site with extra unnecessary security plugin. Like for example, I have this Cloudflare rule that I got it from RunCloud. Basically, is you can protect your admin login page. So whenever you just set, as long as the visitor doesn't come from, for example, my team is from Malaysia, as long as it's not from Malaysia, it'll give you a CAPTCHA. So this method indirectly already blocks most of the attacks. And then further on, of course, you need to implement strong passwords, the very basic kind of security thing. So to me, I think I don't use any security plugins actually. I don't use. So, can. Okay. Then the next one is about combining and minification of CSS, JS assets. This solution has always been advised by GT Matrix or web page test. The idea was to reduce the number of requests by combining the scripts and styles into a single file. But most of the time, it actually causes more problems than benefits you, because every time when let's say you add a plugin or maybe you make any changes to your website, you actually have to recombine the scripts and styles into a single to update the file again, so that your user gets the most updated version of your site. So, and with the introduction of HTTP2, most of the requests from the web server are actually made parallel. So there is no need to actually do this combining and minification thing. It's basically just obsolete. The next one is image optimization. If, let's say, you are not running a photo or art gallery, and your audience doesn't require a high resolution image to view, you shouldn't load everything. You should optimize all of your images on your site to the best quality that you think, because everyone will have a different definition of on the image quality. Maybe you want to give your visitors a good experience by giving a clear, maybe a product picture or anything, but you need to compensate with the speed. So just for example, I will just touch briefly why image optimization is very important in layman terms. Say, for example, you have one website and you have 10 images running on the site. Let's say each image is like 1 MB. And that is already your total page size for that particular page is already 10 MB. And if, let's say, your phone mobile data speed is 1 MB per second, you need 10 seconds to load the entire page fully. So if, let's say, you are able to optimize the images into like 0.1 MB per image, that is total page is like, the page size will be around 1 MB. So instead of your visitor, your audience, using 10 seconds to load your website, now he only needs 1 second to load your website. So this is very important. There are two types of image compression, which is the lossy compression and the lossless compression. Lossy, it reduces the file size significantly, but you will notice some image degradation or pixelated if you overdo it. For the lossless compression, it reduces the size much lesser, but the image quality is pretty retained. There is a new format, I think, provided by Google, which is using the WebP. So, but not all browsers fully support WebP yet. So your plugin provider has to be able to fall back in case the user browser is not able to support WebP. So the next one will be about content delivery network. This is very important because technically a content delivery network is a system of distributed servers that deliver pages and other contents to your user based on the geographic location of the user from the nearest server. So again, not all CDN providers are equal. Many of them have different performance benchmark, but you can check them out on CDN Perf. CDN Perf, they constantly update each of the top CDN providers, so you can know which of the CDN providers are actually at the top ranking one. So the few top ranking ones is like Google, Akamai, Azure, AWS CloudFront, and also Cloudflare. The first four will be all paid services. All are premium, meant for bigger enterprise solutions. But personally, I think Cloudflare is pretty good. Pretty good for a free plan. You almost can have almost all sorts of configuration that you need for a website. The other one is, okay, this one will be about caching. Caching should be the last thing that you do after you have finished all the other optimization that I've mentioned earlier. Because if you do it in the earlier on, yes, you might find that your site loads slightly faster, but you are not fixing the root problem. So if let's say your root is like putting a Band-Aid on your wound is not healed. So you are just putting a Band-Aid so that it can run faster, but you cannot run far. What we want is with a strong foundation, we are able to run far, and the caching will definitely help. There is two types of caching, which is server-level caching and also caching via third-party plugins. For server-level caching, most of the time, this should be provided by your hosting provider, like and your VPS panel. For me, I'm on GridPane. I believe RunCloud also provides the same. As long as you have the panel, they will deploy the server for you, and then you should be able to toggle the caching, page cache or object cache on and off easily. So what if, let's say, you don't have your hosting provider, let's say they don't provide you with caching, because caching is most of the time is sold as a premium tier, premium packages for the shared hosting part. So if let's say you don't have that option on your server level, then you can go with third-party plugins such as the WP Rocket, Swift Performance, Breeze, and also W3 Total Cache. Okay, the other part is lazy loading. Lazy loading, I think, is applicable if, let's say, your website loads a lot of videos, loads a lot of images, and you want the user to have the best experience from the beginning when they load your site. But if, let's say, you are just a simple website and you have done all the optimization steps that I've mentioned before, and your website should be fast enough, you shouldn't need any lazy loading to work on. Basically, if let's say like myself, my site is like 2.6 seconds, I don't think if I lazy load any of my images, it will improve further. The last method that I always use is to disable scripts and styles on pages. The most common performance issue is caused by plugins, because some of the time the plugins, they try to load every single they try to load their scripts and styles on every page where you don't really need it. Like for example, I just take a simple example like a contact form plugin. Maybe a contact form plugin, the styles and scripts should be run on your contact us page only, but you don't need it to run on your, let's say, your home page or your product page or maybe your blog page. You don't really need the styles to run. It uses an unnecessary request which could be used for other things that loads on your website. So how do you disable the scripts and styles? You can use plugins such as Asset Cleanup Pro, Perf Matters, Swift Performance Pro, and also there is a free option which is the plugin organizer. The plugin organizer is free, but the interface is a bit clunky. So it's a bit hard for me to find my way after I've disabled, let's say on this page A, I've disabled these few scripts, and then page B, I disabled the other few scripts. Then later I get lost in between. I'm not sure which one I have disabled or not. So I'm currently using perf methods. Okay, so after you have done all the optimization that above, how do you check for your site performance issues? There is 3 methods that I personally use. One is using Query Monitor. Query Monitor is a plugin. You can find it on the WordPress repo. You just install and you activate it, and you navigate to whatever page that you have on your website that you want to check, maybe like your home page. You just load it, and the plugin will immediately let you know whether how is your database response time, then what is the time taken to load any specific scripts, and any performance issue like PHP errors kind of thing. The other one is using WP CLI. WP CLI, this one you require some technical knowledge. You have to log into the server, and then you need to run some command it will be able to output the list of scripts that are taking the longest time to process when your website loads. The last one is New Relic. Is a premium server monitoring service. Is quite expensive if you are just starting out, and I have not been using it, so I don't have much to comment on this. Okay, so after you have done your work and you found there is some slow plugins that's causing your server to be slow, so what you should do? First of all, the first method is you should go and approach the developer, email them, or you can raise the issue on their WordPress forum. If you need to provide them with as much details as possible, let's say what versions are you running on, which WordPress version you're running on, and then what is your server configuration. After you have given out all the information, and sometimes you might need to even let the developer access your website so that they can troubleshoot, because sometimes it could be just a misconfiguration on your end. It might not be the plugin issue. But if let's say after the developer has already checked it out everything, and if let's say the developer is a good one, your issue should be fixed relatively in maybe give or take about maybe 1 to 2 weeks time for them to check everything. If let's say what happens if the developer doesn't care about the issue, the only way I would recommend is to replace the plugin with an alternative. That's the only way, because that's the only way. And if let's say what happens if the plugin is the only one that I want to use? This is the last resort that I would recommend, which is to get a developer to fix it, or you get a developer to develop a new plugin, which is quite costly in the long run, because you expect the plugin to receive constant updates. So every time when the original developer updates, then you need to get your developer again to go and update the codes so that to fix the bug. So I wouldn't really recommend this method unless you really, really need the plugin. But with so many plugins in the world, I think it's quite easy to find a replacement. Okay, so after you have done all this, how do you check your website performance? Normally, I'll use only, these are the few, GT Matrix, web page test, but personally, I'm using web page test and also Google Lighthouse Chrome extension. The web page test, they have servers all around the world, and they have servers located in Singapore where we can check where it is more relevant to me. Like GT Matrix, the nearest server location I think is in Australia. So the time to first byte will be a bit, the result will be off a little bit. But other than that, I think Google Lighthouse Chrome extension will be a pretty good way to benchmark your site as well. Okay, so we have come to the end. Basically, what I want to stress is that actually your scores doesn't really matter. You don't really have to need to have all A's or having a full score point. I see that some of the people, they try to even load Google Analytics script locally, which I think Google Analytics is a pretty big company. I think most of their script should be pretty optimized. You don't have to further load it locally, because sometimes Google on their end, they changes very often. So if they make any changes, you might find that your script that you have hosted locally needs to be updated. So for me, I think it's not a necessary step unless you just want to increase your score. So the scores, everything are just, you take it as a guideline. You don't have to, but most important is you just have to, actually the most easiest is to use your eye test. Basically, you try to load on your mobile phone or maybe your laptop. You just use the incognito mode. So if your site loads pretty decent, then I would say it's pretty okay. Make sure there is no catch though, because that's why you should use the incognito mode. So, and the most important thing is, don't get too paranoid with the scores, because in the end, your website is meant to bring in more leads, more customers. You have a perfect score, but you don't get leads or customer or conversion, then it doesn't make much sense for you to continue pursuing that score. What matters is the user experience in the end. Thank you so much.
By the way, I have to say I agree with Raymond very much, because the scores itself is really not important, and a lot of people don't understand the reason for behind the score and the guidelines, and they just chase the score, and it is not meaningful. Anybody question? Okay.
But if the score is not so good, it may affect your ranking, Google ranking, search. Oh, about the Google ranking, actually, Google only prioritize fast site. So if let's say you have your document complete or your first content load is fast, and basically, how Google define affects the ranking, the speed is basically on bounce rate. If you have a poor, slow loading website, your bounce rate might go higher, because at the point of 1 or 2 seconds and your website doesn't load, and the user might find that, there's no content, I'll just go back. That is a bounce rate. So if your bounce rate is high, then indirectly it will affect your Google ranking. But if let's say you have a fast time to first byte and you have a fast first contentful pane, it should be fine, because your user is able to interact, and as long as your bounce rate is not, usually bounce rate is about, I think about 40% to 50% should be fine. Should be fine.
Okay, I just add on to Raymond's points. I mean, Raymond has got some good guidelines, but I mean, it also depends on your particular situation. Like Raymond's guidelines of not having to worry about minifying or reducing your scripts. Okay, that's true to a certain extent. Again, it depends on your situation. The reason why you get a bad score or poor score, and then Google page speed tells you, a render blocking script or Java or CSS, and then you must defer, right? And the reason why is because the script or the CSS is blocking the first contentful paint. So like Raymond was talking about, that first paint is the important thing, and if there is a CSS that is blocking, then obviously your contentful paint time is going to be delayed. So I had a similar case recently. So what I did, I disabled the script on that page. I disabled the CSS on that page. So it unfortunately, website optimization is a technical topic, and so boiling it down to ABC score, look at this is really simplifying. How long do you take to learn all of this, Raymond?
I learn as I go. For a few years.
Okay.
May I know which CLI commands you used to check your performance issue?
I don't have the URL right now with me, but you should be able to Google the you should be able to Google it. Just WP CLI speed optimization. Then there's one block, should be some WP bullet something. The domain should be WP bullet.
Okay, all right. Extra point for query monitor. Don't forget to deactivate after you're done testing. Any more questions? Okay.
If the time to first buy sometimes is good, sometimes bad, what's the possible causes? Hosting.
Most likely it's change hosting, but there is another reason that I will see that you have a high TTFB if let's say you are using Cloudflare, the free plan. Because I have raised a ticket on Cloudflare before. They say because you are using the free plan, they will only route your users to the most available, meaning the most underused CDN server that they have. So unless you are a paid user, then they will always route from the nearest server to your user. So there might be some discrepancy if you are using Cloudflare.
Any more questions? Okay. All right. I think that's it. So thank you very much to Raymond. We have a token of appreciation.